All right, well, welcome everybody to this second iteration of the American Library in Paris's virtual Evenings with an Author programming. I'm Catherine Olien and I'm the Programs Manager at the library. I wanted to start off by saying if you don't know the library, we're a 100-year-old institution. It's actually our centennial year, so we're having to find all sorts of creative ways to celebrate in confinement, and one of the ways that we're doing so is starting to build this virtual digital community with you all, since we can't enjoy each other's company in person. So we have a number of virtual resources and e-resources that you can figure out how to link up to on our website. And we're also offering a bunch of kids programs, teen programs, and I run the adult programs. And so what that looks like right now is we have workshops and book talks. So the workshops are for members only, but they're free. And the virtual Evenings with an Author, like tonight's program, they're free and open to everybody, wherever you're joining us from and whether you're a member or not. And this gives us a chance to check in, as we are tonight, with people that we've previously hosted at the library. And in addition, we'll be hearing some new voices and getting some wonderful book recommendations at the same time. I wanted to mention that next week we'll have Whitney Scherer. So she's going to be joining us on Tuesday, the 5th of May. And she's the author of a book called The Age of Light, which I can really highly recommend. It's about the artist Lee Miller and her creative experience, as well as her love affair with the artist Man Ray. So that's a really wonderful confinement read. If you're interested in joining for that event, please visit our website and sign up just as you've done for this one. You can find more information about our events on eLibris, which is our newsletter, on Facebook, and just by visiting our homepage. And you'll know as soon as we do when we're going to be able to meet in person again. So we had some news today from the Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, about possible reopenings, but we don't have those specific details yet, but we'll share those with you just as soon as we do. So again, thank you for joining us. Tonight, we're very pleased to welcome Susan Harlan. She's a professor of English literature at Wake Forest University. Her 2018 book, Luggage, is something I can really, really recommend for everybody. It's a fantastic, wonderful, creative account. So it takes us on a journey of, oh, wonderful, you have the book. So it takes us on a journey with the suitcase and how suitcases accessorize, hold, and accompany our lives. She has also written satire for McSweeney's, Internet Tendency, The Billfold, Avidly, The Hairpin, among many others. And other essays have appeared in The Guardian US, The Paris Review Daily, Guernica, Literary Hub, The Common, and many, many more. Tonight she'll be sharing with us a personal essay about tote bags that she's acquired along her travels. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing that essay. We'll get there in about 20 minutes. But right now, Susan, we'll just start with a sort of informal check-in and a conversation between the two of us. So I wondered if you might tell me where and how you were doing in confinement.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Catherine, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for coming. This is really exciting. And I live by myself. And so my confinement is very solitary with my dog, Millie, who's behind me. So you can see her there. And so it's nice to see so many faces, some familiar and some not. So I live in central North Carolina in a small city called Winston-Salem that's sort of known for cigarettes mostly. And I have been doing, I guess, okay in confinement, good days and bad days, as I think all of us have been having. Because I teach, I work from home a lot already, but it is still strange to transition to being at home all the time. And not going into the office. I feel really lucky because I have a really lovely house and I've been spending a lot of time on my front porch, which is very Southern, and enjoying that. And when people walk by, they always say hi and kind of stop, which is nice. There's sort of a like heightened sociability, I think, that comes with everyone being stuck at home. And I used to kind of think that I hated small talk, but I think I'm reconsidering that. And I actually really love small talk. And all I want to do is talk about the weather with someone. So it's been hard, as I think it has been for all of us. But I also think my life has already been set up in a way that I'm in some ways pretty used to being on my own and at home. I love to write about my house, and I also love to write about being alone. And so it's kind of funny that two of the things that I find I'm really most interested in are now so much on everyone's mind. Not that everyone is alone. Obviously, a lot of people are in confinement with other people, but I think the ideas of home and solitude are so much with us now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I agree that you have a sort of advantage in that sense that you've been practicing these skills and writing about them, thinking creatively about them. It's so wonderful that you're able to share that with us now, I think. Sorry, I got a couple more people to admit who were late to the party, but that's just fine. No problem to be late. I wanted to ask next about any sort of confinement hobbies or discoveries that you've made in recent days. I know when you and I touched base last week, you spoke about sort of bravely getting into gardening because you're very much into interiors, and that's something you've really worked on for many years now and written on, but you weren't so much maybe into tackling the exterior space. So tell us how that's going.
It's true. So on my front porch, there are a number of potted plants and flowers, but that has been the extent of my engagement with any kind of living thing of that nature. And I have really loved setting up my house over the years. I've lived here for 7 years, and it was already pretty filled with stuff when I first moved in, and it's gotten even more filled with stuff over the years because I'm a big collector, and that's something that I'll obviously be thinking about today and talking about my tote bags. But I have never tackled my backyard, which is actually pretty big and pretty nice, but it's just sort of a no man's land with a broken down carport made out of cinder blocks, and the grass is kind of all lumpy and all over the place, and there's big piles of discarded bricks and a falling down picket fence, and it's just been kind of too intimidating. And so I've just ignored it and kind of pretended that it wasn't there. But now, with being at home and not knowing kind of how long I might be at home, it does sound like a fun project. So I have kind of thrown myself into it, I think, because it's a good distraction in a time of stress and anxiety. When I was going up for tenure a couple of years ago, I built a cabinet of curiosities in my house.
Oh, that's amazing.
A small room off the dining room that I filled with like shells and taxidermy and pictures of skeletons and rocks and all sorts of things. And that was kind of my way of dealing with the stress of that like professional moment. So I think this gardening is very similar to that. I've ordered some raised beds. I got a picnic table from a local guy who just dropped it off in my backyard the other day. And it's just like solid and classic. I like love a picnic table. I just feel like, it's really beautiful. He was like a lovely older guy named Walt who made it, even though we didn't really get to talk to each other. And so, yes, I'm gonna figure out how to plant things and start working on that, and hopefully have some kind of greens and some flowers, and be able to spend some time outside and get some exercise. I'm not a very active person to start out with, but I have realized since not teaching anymore that teaching is actually kind of tiring, and it is actually like it's more physical than you think. And when it's gone, I just feel really sedentary. And so I think having the yard and messing around with that will be a lot of fun, and it'll be an excuse for me to collect a lot more garden gnomes and just a lot more everything. I already have a number of garden gnomes, but I don't think you can necessarily have too many garden gnomes.
Obviously,
One of them is
never
from
too
Paris,
many.
actually. I got him on the banks of the Seine in a gardening store, and I named him Baudelaire.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Oh my gosh, maybe you'll have to write us a story about all of these garden gnomes at some point. That'll be the next event.
That would be fun.
I also you've already gestured towards Millie, who's very sweetly sitting behind you, but I wanted to say, one of our shared passions is dogs. I have my own dog, Cooper. And I find that, he's basically one of my greatest joys in confinement. I mean, he gets me outside, he keeps my spirits up. I'm constantly entertained just watching him discover the world and also appreciate the world. As you walk outside with your dog, you know, they don't need a lot to be happy. And so you sort of look at them and think, oh, okay, I can slow things down. I can embrace a new rhythm of life. I wanted to ask you how Millie was enjoying confinement, whether that means she's enjoying your company much more, or, you know, what sort of adventures have you two been getting up to?
I think she's probably pretty happy that I'm around all the time because she's very attached. She's a rescue dog. And so she's kind of scared of other people, but mostly just wants to be around me all the time and follows me around the house. Even though I've had her for like a decade, she still follows me around if I leave the room. When I first adopted her, she would creep up behind me and I wouldn't quite be sure that she was there when I was doing dishes or something. So a couple of times I accidentally stepped on her and I had to get used to her stealth creeping up. But no, she's just completely saving me. I mean, it's like you said, you and I have talked about our dogs, and she always already is one of the best things in my life. And there's just something so nice, I think, about being alone with your dog. It's kind of a different kind of solitude. And we take a lot of road trips through the South usually. You know, we used to, and would go to lovely cabins in the woods. And I like to go to the Smokies in Eastern Tennessee and stay on this beautiful river in a small town that I really like. And I always take Millie and we have really fun adventures. So yeah, at home, like you're saying, getting out and walking is really nice. It's got to be so different in a big city, especially somewhere like Paris, where normally the streets would be so full. Here, I'm just on a kind of suburban street with just single family homes. So when I walk my block, you can't really tell that there's anything different about the world. It doesn't present itself in any way. Like I have to go to the grocery store or something and see like the big strip mall with like no cars in the parking lot, just like, you know, a scattering of cars of people who are doing their grocery shopping just then. So so we have been doing kind of short walks, nothing major because she's getting old, so she doesn't do very long walks anymore. And a lot of the green spaces in Winston-Salem, I've heard like a lot of the pathways are actually quite crowded with people, it seems, because everyone wants to get outside. So we have sort of avoided those because I don't want to be too much around people. But no, she's like absolutely my kind of saving, you know, I don't know what I would do without Millie. I don't care to know.
Oh, I can understand that. I also wanted to ask, since, you know, you don't seem to me like someone who gets bored very often. And I sort of invited people to this event by advertising your wonderful skill of making the ordinary extraordinary. And I think that is another one of your advantages that you have right now as we face this incredibly difficult situation and some of the isolation that may come along with it. I wanted to ask you then how important you feel imagination has been as you face these circumstances for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important, I think. And thank you for that about making the ordinary extraordinary. That's a really nice thing to say. And that totally makes my day. This is already such a nice day because the sun is out and my moods are entirely dependent on the weather at this point. Yeah, I think that I didn't read a lot for the first couple weeks because I was really kind of distracted and just couldn't really focus. But then I was able to kind of get a little bit more into reading and into my normal rhythms. I am fascinated by the idea of boredom, as you say, and I guess I don't know what to say. Maybe that I don't entirely like believe in it as a concept. I was writing an essay last fall about sitting, like just sitting and kind of doing nothing and trying to think about that, which actually came in part out of my trip to Paris in November. And just the idea of kind of sitting in cafes, which is something that people have written so much about big American and European cities and all sorts of cities, just the idea of sitting and watching people and not really doing anything, even not reading or not writing or not checking your phone. I tried really hard when I was there just to use my phone as a camera and not to be kind of checking up on it. And I do think it's I've thought about it a lot sitting on my front porch, just like the idea of just kind of sitting and like being with your thoughts and being with yourself. And so I really like doing that. And I just find it really important given all the kind of capitalist mandates that drive our lives and ideas of productivity, which are still so potent in like a moment of global trauma, the idea that you have to be accomplishing something and you have to be productive and you have to have something to show for like how you use your time. And I just am really suspicious of all of that. And I think that it is almost a kind of like resistance to those capitalist mandates to try to just be whatever another word would be for bored, to kind of do nothing. And the pleasure of doing nothing. I think it's really nice. It's also very nice with a dog because dogs like doing nothing with you.
They absolutely do. Yeah, I think it's definitely true what you're saying. And also it provides us an opportunity to discover who we are beneath the labels and the identities that we take on. So for you, as you know, you're a scholar, you're an educator, you're a professor, you're an author, but what are you also beyond all of those things? So I think it's wonderful that you can take a step back from that and enjoy and embrace the leisure if you have the time, because I know those other tasks are definitely still there.
True. I know we all have our work to do, and that's so important.
Yeah.
But I think, I love writers who write about walking. I think for like a similar reason, just the space that like walking opens up for people. Like there's so many writers who write about walking and how that's a kind of break from their labor of writing. So I think like you're saying, a kind of balance, and that balance I think is important.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask what you're reading, or if you have any recommendations to pass on for our very, very bookish audience tonight.
I have been reading all sorts of good things. I've been reading mostly poetry. I tend to read a lot of nonfiction and a lot of poetry. I've been rereading Sense and Sensibility. So that's been my novel that I've been rereading. I just reread Persuasion, and I like to reread some of Austen every year. So I'm really enjoying going back to that. As far as poetry goes, I read Kieren Carson's Still Life. I don't know if any of you have seen that. He was an Irish poet who passed away last year, and he wrote the book from kind of when he was diagnosed, I think he had cancer, to when he died. And it's really beautiful poems about things in his house. Art that he has, like pretty much art that he and his wife have collected. And so there are these lovely poems about art objects. And I just loved it. And it's so much about daily life and the walks that they take together in Belfast. And it was just really one of the best things I've ever read in my life. I just thought it was totally extraordinary. Excuse me, it's quite allergy-ish here and springy. So I loved that. I just started Mark Doty's Still Life with Oysters and Lemon, which is also about a painting. So I think for some reason, I'm feeling quite obsessed with writing about people who write about art. And I'm really enjoying that. That's really beautiful. I'm looking around and seeing what else. I just got the new Myrick illustrated autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, which I'm so excited about because I love Myrick. She has a book called My Favorite Things that are it's just beautiful illustrations and photographs of everyday objects that are significant to her. And it's one of my favorite books and has been really important to me. I got David Leibovitz's new book, Drinking French.
That's right, yeah.
So I've been really excited about that. And I've been watching his Instagram videos. And so I'm gonna make some of his cocktails and take a look at some of his recipes. So yeah, and then I think that's kind of a lot of stuff I've been reading. I just have been jumping around a little bit, which I think is why I feel like reading poetry now, that I can kind of dip in and dip out.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So my colleague Boyan, who's under here, is Boyan the librarian.
I remember it. Nice to see you again.
So he's tuning in, and he's reminded us of the author Tom Hodgkinson. Is this someone that you've read before? So He's writing, he does writing on idling. So he wrote books, How to Be Idle, How to Be Free, Idle Parent. And Boyan wants to point out that we're subscribed as the library to the magazine The Idler, which is something he started.
Okay.
So his philosophy is of a relaxed approach to life, enjoying it as it comes rather than toiling for an imagined better future. So I think that's a really beautiful sentiment, and
Really
it goes along nicely with some of the reading you were describing. So thank you for the recommendation, Boyan.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Yeah, I think sometimes you just sort of want to read things that suit your mood and the kinds of things that you're thinking about. And so I think maybe I am drawn to a lot of things that are about home and the domestic and idling and that sort of thing, just because of the way things are right now.
Absolutely. So before we launch into your essay, which I can't wait to hear, I wanted to ask one final question, which is a very simple one. What's something that's giving you hope right now?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see. I mean, I guess I would say probably like my good friends and family, that even though I live alone and this has been a pretty solitary experience, I have been on the phone a lot. And that has been incredibly helpful, and has really kind of kept my spirits up on days when I haven't felt so great. Sometimes I think when you have those days, you don't really want to talk to anyone because you feel like you wouldn't be very fun to talk to, or you just don't feel up for it kind of psychologically, and you just want to watch a movie or like withdraw into yourself. And so especially I think on those evenings, mostly to talk to a good friend has been really nice, and has been really helpful, and has made me feel that I have a wonderful network of people in my life. I think that's something that is a good thing that comes out of a moment like this, that you see things that you've kind of built for yourself. And that makes me happy and hopeful. And yeah, so that's what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is really, really important to stay connected now, even when it feels sort of overwhelming or like an extra thing you have to do. I mean, for instance, tonight, so every Tuesday evening, I kind of have a standing date with some of my dog friends in Paris, and we're all spread out now, from the UK to the 12th to the 2nd of Paris, different neighborhoods, but we hop on, what is this app actually? The app has been really nice. It's, how you have to kind of vary your virtual experiences. So like if I'm on Zoom for too long, I'm like, no, I need to do something else, like a Google Hangout, or we're using House Party. Actually, we sort of have this standing date every Tuesday, and you can see like who's in the house right now. And so you just join them in that room, and it's been really nice. Even when you go into it thinking that you're going to be too tired or something, you always leave those conversations really uplifted. So I think that's admirable to keep connecting.
I think so too. And I think a lot of us are already used to having friendships that are long distance, that we're used to maintaining over the phone or over Skype. I didn't know Zoom until 6 weeks ago. And so I think that it's a reminder of how important that is. I worry about my students because, they went home for spring break and then poof, like all of a sudden they just didn't come back. And they're younger and they're used to being like in their community on campus with people around them. And I think that's really hard then to kind of go home and be back in your childhood home and away from your friends. Where I think those of us who are older maybe have the advantage of already having maintained those relationships for a long time. So it's hard, I think, for everyone in kind of different ways.
Right. Well, we're at about half time here, so I'd like to invite you rather to read take a last sip of tea, and I'll mute myself here so we can just sit back and listen to you, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. So as Catherine said, I'm just going to read for about 20 minutes and then we can talk. I hope this is a subject that will appeal to people. My essay is called Ode to Tote Bags. One night a couple of weeks ago, I couldn't sleep, so I got up and gathered all my tote bags together. I took them off the coat rack in my foyer and out of my car and out of closets and drawers. I'm tempted to list them all because I love lists, the way they place things in relationship to one another, creating a collection. But I will not, because you can see all of them here. I set them on my dining room table that night and counted them, 35 in all. And after I counted my tote bags, I went back to bed and I slept pretty well. I came to the American Library in Paris last November to read an essay about souvenirs. And to some extent, this talk is an extension of that one. I talked about my souvenir collection, my snow globes, thimbles, figurines, all sorts of things. But I also left some souvenirs out, including my magnets, which cover my fridge, and my tote bags. Se souvenir de means to remember in French. In The Great War and Modern Memory, the historian Paul Fussell writes that when English soldiers brought things back from the front, they called them souvenirs rather than mementos. So the word itself might be a souvenir. The memories souvenirs hold are memories of place. I wrote about souvenirs a bit in my book, Luggage, which was published in the Bloomsbury series Object Lessons in 2018. The series examines the hidden lives of ordinary things. And I am a big fan, as Catherine said, of ordinary things. In fact, this is the tote bag that I got when I signed my book contract, a tote bag for a book about bags. In thinking about luggage, about what we bring with us when we leave home, I also found that I thought a lot about what we bring back. Our luggage contains a set of objects when we set off on a trip, but it rarely contains the same set of objects on our return. Sometimes we have to be careful about what we acquire when we travel, as we don't want to lug home an absurdly heavy suitcase. I imagine that buying books while traveling is an issue for a number of us. The word lug is the root of luggage, and to lug is to labor. It is not easy to lug something. I wrote this in my book. What do we mean by luggage? The word has its origins in war culture. For hundreds of years, it referred to the baggage, munitions, and supplies of an army, including trunks, backpacks, mess equipment, shoulder bags, and pouches suitable for a soldier, especially a cavalryman or an artilleryman. It was inconveniently heavy stuff that had to be lugged about. Today, luggage means all baggage that belongs to travelers and passengers, especially baggage that is transported by public conveyance. We often refer to our luggage as our bags, collapsing it with other kinds of containers that hold our things and allow us to transport them. It is hard to think about life without bags. As Stephen Connor notes in his book, Paraphernalia, The Curious Life of Magical Things, quote, human beings make the world into bags because holding things together, holding things up, and being ourselves held and held up are so important to us, end quote. So we might not think about tote bags as luggage. As Adrienne Lafrance wrote in The Atlantic in 2015, tote bags have been around since at least the 1800s, but L.L. Bean is widely credited for having popularized the bag. The website copy for their boat and tote bag reads as follows. Introduced as Bean's ice carrier way back in 1944, the boat and tote was billed as a bag made of builder's canvas for hauling ice from car to ice chest. Today, you can spot our iconic tote doing heavy lifting everywhere from grocery stores to gardens, from beaches to bedroom closets, tested to hold up to 500 pounds. It'll carry more than you can carry, we promise. So that's what they say. This description underscores labor, weight, 500 pounds of ice. Yet in its various contemporary manifestations, the tote bag is not luggage that lugs, it totes. You might lug trunks, but you tote a tote bag. You carry it on your person, which to some extent limits its weight. There are many kinds of tote bags, but today I'm going to talk about those that are linked to place, that take the form of a souvenir. These bags are not expensive. Materially, they are utterly ordinary. The design is simple, perfect, unremarkable, 2 pieces of fabric sewn together with 2 handles. They are lightweight, almost nothing. One thing I love about my vintage luggage collection is its weight. The weight suggests that it's weighty in other ways, that it is significant. I have this train case with me as an example of the weighty luggage of the past, which even empty is weighty. You might think carefully about buying a new suitcase, particularly an expensive one, but tote bags are the sort of object you acquire easily. You can fold them up and put them in another bag or in a coat pocket. They are common. They are, it seems, everywhere. I have my tote bags here today or this evening, depending on where you are, and I thought I would tell some stories about them, including those I have acquired in Paris or nearby. When I started my book Luggage, I was thinking about the kinds of stories that luggage tells, about travel, about home, about the past, about ourselves. Tote bags also tell stories. They seem to carry stories with them. This is my tote bag from Versailles. It's about 13 inches by 17 inches, unbleached cotton, almost transparent, as you can see, I think, in the light. Very light, not a thing that you lug. It doesn't have a panel on the bottom, as some tote bags do. It's flat, like a piece of paper. One day when I was in Paris last fall, I decided to go to Versailles. It was a last-minute decision, so after lunch, I got on the train. I worried that it was too late in the day, but I didn't care. It was Thanksgiving, a holiday I don't even really celebrate here at home. When I arrived, I picked up a map of the grounds at the information desk. The woman asked me which language and handed an English one to me, and I said thank you. It was a gray day, so I had brought my umbrella tucked in the pocket of my coat. The light was clear and wintry, diffused by an overcast sky, which in the evening would turn to rain, puncturing the tan gravel of the gardens with puddles. The statues in the gardens were wrapped in shrouds of heavy gray-green cloth and tied with rope. They were at rest, preparing to be revealed in warmer weather, to be admired or ignored. We'll emerge again in the spring, they seemed to say. The statues kept to themselves. I bought myself a glass of champagne and sat down on a stone bench. That's FedEx, so my dog is probably gonna bark for about 15 seconds. I had my American Library in Paris tote bag with me, and I set it down on the bench beside me. I looked at one of the statues for a while in his drapery and robes, thinking that he might shed these garments like a monk's robe and saunter forth if he chose. I walked along the Grand Canal, alone, apart from the occasional jogger or walker, and ate a ham and cheese panini by the water, my feet dangling over the edge, and watched the ducks and swans. Can you still hear me, Catherine, with Millie barking? Is it okay? Should I pause for a second until they drop the package? Okay. She is very protective. She's making sure that I'm protected. A swan swam up and banged the bottom of my boot with her beak. She wanted some of my panini. An old couple passed and smiled at me, and I said in French that the swan was beautiful, but I said singe, monkey, instead of cygne, swan. I only realized this hours later. The couple didn't indicate that there was anything strange about my observation about the beautiful monkey. The woman said that I should give her some of my panini. I don't know if it would be okay for her. Ham and cheese, I said in French. Oh yes, she said, smiling. She'll love it. So I broke off some of the bread and tossed it out. It's okay, Mills. The swans love bread, she said. It makes them happy. I asked if they came here a lot, and she said yes, that they lived close by. Later in the early evening, I saw them again, sitting on a bench, tossing bread to another swan on the lawn. I wondered if these swans were descended from the swans of kings, if they traced the same pathways in the water as the swans before them, their white feathers blowing on the surface of the water. In the early 1660s, the royal way ended with a pool called the Lake of the Swans, which dates from Louis XIII. Now this is Apollo's fountain. There is no more Lake of the Swans. I bought a Hall of Mirrors magnet in one of the gift shops, and I also bought my tote bag. There were lots of gift shops at Versailles, some of which sold primarily Versailles branded objects like my magnet and tote, and others that sold tea sets, fans, crystal goblets, and jewelry, things that suggest monarchy and courtliness. Souvenirs tell stories. They are a way of remembering, of holding on to an experience that we know will pass away. Professor Emeritus of Design Studies, Beverly Gordon, was one of the first people to take souvenirs seriously as an object of study. In her 1986 essay, she called them messengers of the extraordinary. Tourists visit places, she said, away from home for the purpose of experiencing a change, something distinct from everyday life. They seek what she calls non-permanent, non-ordinary experience. And souvenirs embody our need to concretize the extraordinary. We buy them because we know we can't hold on to these experiences once we are home. My tote bag brings to mind my swan, his tap, tap, tapping on the bottom of my boot, and I try to hold them in my mind to keep him as a souvenir. So souvenirs are messengers of the extraordinary. This tote bag from the grocery store Franprix might not seem to mark the extraordinary, but in a sense, I think it does. I got it on my trip to Paris 2 years ago in January. I arrived early in the morning and fell asleep for hours, even though I knew it was probably best for jet lag to stay awake. The place I was renting was on a small courtyard with a Christmas tree lit up with white lights and a pink plastic watering can in the shape of a rabbit. When I woke up later than I had intended, I took myself out to dinner at a restaurant on the Canal Saint-Martin, close to where I was staying. I read and listened to people's conversations. The man at the next table was reading Le Journal du Village de Saint-Martin. There was a candle on my table and a small basket of bread and butter. I had a steak and a half carafe of red wine and then walked back to my rental. The sidewalks were littered with discarded Christmas trees poking out of big black garbage bags. I stopped at Franprix and bought some groceries: Nescafe, soap, wine, bananas, milk, and sugar in what looked like a milk carton. I walked the aisles, looking over all the packages of ham in the fridge, each with a picture of slices of bright pink ham. I bought this tote at the checkout because I thought it would make me feel like I lived in Paris. Grocery shopping sometimes makes you feel that you belong to a place. At the end of the week, I wrapped the half-full jar of Nescafe in my tote bag and tucked it in my suitcase because I'm convinced that Nescafe tastes different in the US. But at the airport, I realized that my suitcase was too heavy. I bought too many books. So I took all the books out and put them in my tote bag and carried them home with me through the Atlanta airport to my own small airport in Greensboro, North Carolina. Now, my Franprix bag brings to mind not only my Paris groceries, but also the books I bought on that trip. The white covers and the neatness of the titles, the way French bookstores smell like paper. Many of my tote bags are from bookstores and libraries. Here is one from Oxford Books in Oxford, Mississippi, acquired on a road trip years ago when I visited Faulkner's house, Roanoke. I went to the bookstore first, looking over shelves and picking out a few things, and then I headed to Roanoke with my bag and my new books and walked around the house for hours, looking at Faulkner's notes and outlines of his books on the walls. This one is from Malaprops in Asheville and Downtown Books, which is also in Asheville. I love to drive up in the mountains, and we didn't have an independent bookstore in Winston-Salem at that point years ago. So I just liked to be in a bookstore. This is my red wheelbarrow tote, another Paris bag. I went to the bookstore one afternoon and then walked through the Jardin de Luxembourg following a crow. He moved from one bench to the next, from one statue to the next, and I walked behind him. I also have bags from the catacombs and from the Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature and from Shakespeare and Company, all places I have spent mornings or afternoons. My Paris bags make up a collection within a collection. I carry them when I'm in Paris, and I carry them at home. Between a small purse and a tote bag, you feel prepared to meet the day. And depending on your day, your tote bag might start out almost empty, but end up rather full. My American Library in Paris tote bag was my work tote in the fall and early spring before in-person classes were canceled. Now my totes don't tote anything. They just hang there. I arrange and rearrange them on my coat rack, putting different ones facing out each day so I can look at them and think about past trips. Branded tote bags are a bit bourgeois. You get them at theaters, at libraries and bookstores, from journals and publishing houses, from art galleries and museums, from National Public Radio. One could be accused of trying to perform one's culturedness in toting tote bags. A 2018 strategist roundup of the coveted tote bags that scream status included the Brooklyn bookstore Books Are Magic, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the London Review of Books, the Gagosian Gallery, Knoll, the Get Go grocery store in Marfa, Texas, the Phoenicia Diner in the Catskills, publishers like Verso and Riverhead, and the now shuttered Clyde's Pharmacy on the Upper East Side. I actually have the Get Go one, although I couldn't remember where it was from until I looked it up. So again, souvenirs mark forgetting. I like to go to Paris in the winter because it's quiet and cold and there are practically no lines anywhere. 2 years ago, I walked right into Notre Dame, just sauntered up to the security guard, opened my bag for inspection, and walked in and sat for a while. I don't remember seeing tote bags in the gift shop there, but I do have this one from a place I think of as my cathedral, even as an agnostic. The bag is from St. John the Divine in Morningside Heights in New York City, near Columbia, where I was in college in the mid-90s. I had been going to this cathedral for 25 years, first as a New Yorker, and now as a visitor who forgets more and more about the subway stops each time I return. The design is of the rose window, a white design on black. The cathedral has never been finished, and the stone is rough in places. When I was in college, I would go sit in the poets' corner, right, a kind of nook right off to the left, with the names of American poets listed on stones. I would read Whitman and sit, and after a while, I would walk to the Keith Haring altar in a chapel behind the main altar and sit there for a while too. But more than any of the building's beauties, I loved its roughness, the unfinished stone, the sense of a place becoming. When I bought this tote bag, I transferred a few books into it from Book Culture, the bookstore right up the street on 112th Street. I had shoved these books into my purse, but they didn't really fit. I wrote my name in them and broke the bindings, something that I always do right away. I have 3 tote bags from Book Culture, this one, and this one, and this one. And I think that this one with the red flowers is the oldest, maybe before a rebranding. This was my bookstore for many years, and I still think of it that way. When you move away from a place, sometimes you want to think of it as even more yours. Perhaps we hope this sense of ownership will make up for loss. I moved away from New York City a decade ago for my job here in North Carolina, and I used to want nothing more than to go back. But now I feel more settled where I am. So my New York City totes feel like messengers of the extraordinary and the ordinary, like messengers from the past, a kind of autobiography. The stories that tote bags tell often have to do with books. You can tote many things in a tote bag, but they also seem to want to tote books. Their shape is perfect for papers, folders, books, notebooks. Some people no longer carry around these things. They have them all on a laptop or a tablet, but many still do. Book culture used to be labyrinth books when I was in college, and I was sure that I still had one of my labyrinth totes from years ago, but when I went to look, I couldn't find it. I suppose it is lost, and I wish that I didn't know this, that I thought I still had it, even if I don't. Last week, I hung my purple New York Public Library tote, which is this one, on my coat rack. This tote bag is well worn and pretty dirty, although perhaps not quite so well worn as this New York Historical Society one, which is very battered. I mostly like to keep the lion's side of the NYPL tote bag facing out, but sometimes I'll turn it around so I can see the Jane Austen quote on the other side. I wrote my dissertation in the Rose Reading Room and spent many years at those long tables, your seat number marked in front of you, the clouds lined in gold above you. I also have a couple of Strand tote bags, which I'll show you. There's 4 of them. There's gnomes. See, my fondness for gnomes. And a kind of classic New York coffee one that I got there. And a Rosie the Riveter one, which I've sewn a Smokey Bear patch on. So I used to carry my Strand tote bags in New York a lot too. In confinement, I think some of us are experiencing a heightened awareness of the domestic objects that surround us. They seem to announce themselves more loudly. As I said, I live alone, so my dog Millie and my things are my companions, and they are good companions. In his Odes to Common Things, Pablo Neruda wrote about some of the things, common, fundamental, or elemental, that make up our lives, objects that are magical in their ordinariness. Some of these things are food, an orange, an apple, an artichoke, bread. Some are furniture, a table, a chair, a bed. Some are things that aid us in life, a dictionary, a bar of soap, scissors. And still others are part of the natural world, a cluster of violets, a gillyflower. And some are animals, a dog and a cat. These things are such a part of daily life that we barely notice them, and yet we do. They are everyday objects. And the moment we use that word, every day, we situate ourselves in time and place. He writes that, quote, I have a crazy, crazy love of things, end quote. These odes make the common uncommon. They make the everyday extraordinary. There are few things so ordinary as a bag, and yet I find that these bags occupy my thoughts at present. They are nothings, weightless things filled with things. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was fantastic. Yeah, we can give a silent applause here.
Oh, thank you. I love a silent applause.
Oh, that was so wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks. That was a lot of fun. I'm sorry for FedEx and my barking Millie.
Can't help it. We have, misadventures in home officing. That's totally fine. So
exactly. It's probably one of my raised garden beds that was being delivered.
Oh, that's too funny. So as far as those of you with questions in the audience, I invite you to submit via the chat feature now. Please do keep your mics off and I'll read your questions aloud. And Susan, I just wanted to also start by saying that we have a new edition tote bag at the library.
Really?
So the next time, yeah, I'm going to try to show you our, it's not working at all. Oh, this is unfortunate. So yeah, there you go. You see? So this is our Centennial Logo.
Amazing.
And the next time you visit us, you can go home with one of our new ones. Yeah,
I would love to do that. I took a couple of them home last time for friends, including my friend Sarah, who I can see here on camera.
That's wonderful. And they're also
yeah.
white, so they're white with red, so you'll have sort of this matching ensemble of American Library and Paris totes, which
I can't wait.
Great. Yeah, and just before getting into questions, I just wanted to say how moving I found your essay too. I mean, sometimes you feel like you can have an unnatural obsession with things. Like I am a person who studied art history, and so I've always loved wonderful art objects, but also just sort of ordinary things that mean a great deal to me based on memories or trips or things like that. And I think you've kind of explained for me where that attachment comes from and made me feel a little less materialistic, because it's really about the feelings you invest in them more so than, having these objects or needing to acquire a huge collection. It's much more than that. So thank you for illuminating.
I think that's true. I mean, I think sometimes that we're sort of shamed about having an attachment to material things and made to feel that there's something kind of bad about it. And yeah, I think these things, especially ordinary things that aren't maybe materially valuable, but just can become really important. Collectors always feel that, right? Collectors just don't feel ashamed or embarrassed about acquiring things or about having things. And so thanks. That's a really nice thing to say, because I do think that we should love our things.
Yeah, celebrate those connections.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So we do have some questions rolling in. I will start with Barbara's, and she writes, "Thank you, Susan. When you wrote your essay about sitting while in Paris, did you write about the wonderful chairs that you find in parks like the Luxembourg Gardens or the different bistro and cafe chairs?"
Oh, I did not write about those chairs, but I love that style of chair. And I'm going to lift up my laptop because I have in my foyer just a little, can you see that little piece of the chair? Does that work? It's like one of those little
yes.
chairs.
Yeah.
So those chairs definitely make me think of the Jardin de Luxembourg. They also make me think of Bryant Park in New York, behind the New York Public Library, because that park is just also filled with metal tables and chairs that you can kind of shift around and sit in. And I love the like simplicity of those folding chairs. So I did write a couple of short pieces about that trip and about walking and sitting, but I didn't write about chairs, and I would love to keep thinking about that. I love Neruda's poem about the table, and Ponge, Francis Ponge also has a great poem about tables. And I think these things that kind of support us and that we sit in and that we sit at are so important to sitting. So yeah, those chairs are wonderful, aren't they? They look so pretty against like the tan gravel also.
Yeah.
Like you don't see that tan gravel all over the place. It always makes me think of Paris, just that particular shade.
That's true. I love how mobile they are too. So you'll see them sort of migrate throughout the day as people drag them into and out of the sun, near the fountain, away from the water. It's really interesting to see. They have a life of their own.
They do. Yeah. And like you're saying that you can just carry them around. It's so nice.
Yeah. All right, the next question is from Sam, who's writing, "I've seen people joking about remember places." I'm not sure what that is. Remember places is in quotes. And how they liked their New York City apartments better when they came with the New York City as an amenity. In these times where the idea of place has significantly narrowed, shrinking to the small space in which we're sheltering, has the idea of a souvenir taken on a new layer of meaning? Wistful of pain or happy memories, something else?
Thanks for that, Sam. I think, yes, hello. I have been thinking a lot about my souvenirs, and I have them all over my house. The one I picked up before is a Las Vegas snow globe, and I also have this Hot Springs, Arkansas snow globe, and got a Paris one here on my coffee table. I've always felt that souvenirs are kind of melancholic, and I think I'm attracted to kind of melancholic, mournful objects that are to some extent about loss, but that also invoke a kind of wonderful experience. And so the melancholy is also a kind of delightful melancholy, I think. But now that we can't travel, I've been thinking a lot about my souvenirs and about how they do just become these sort of stand-ins for your trips and for the places that you've gone in a moment when you can't go anywhere. And so they just become these little material memories and these little reminders. I mean, again, I think just the word itself and the extent to which these are like objects of memory, that they do become these reminders in a time of confinement. And that's the thing that I miss the most about this change. Like, I'm sort of okay, even with the vast amount of time that I'm spending by myself. I'm sort of okay with working from home, again, depending on the day, but I really miss being able to go places. And so I think that, yeah, that my souvenirs have been kind of nice aids in a way, and have made me think of nice things, pleasant things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So our director of the library, Audrey Chapuis, is in the audience, and
Audrey,
she writes a nice thank you to both of us, and then wants to know if you've heard of the nap ministry. So it's all about rest as resistance.
oh,
The nap ministry. It might be something to pursue after tonight's event. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Thank you, Audrey. Getting all sorts of good book recommendations.
Fascinating. Yeah. Oh, and Ellen wants to know, so the name of the poet that you mentioned who wrote a book as he was dying last year.
Oh, yes, Kieren Carson. Yeah, so Carson is his last name, Carson, and the book is called Still Life.
Okay. Thank you for
really, really beautiful. He has a book called Belfast Confetti that I also just read, that's very much about Belfast and the city's landscape and history of violence. And I also got his complete poems. I've got big fat volume also.
And then I'll just read a comment from Heather, who writes, "Thank you, Susan. What a treat to be able to see and hear you in your home, surrounded by all the special objects that define and reflect you. Thank you for taking the time to be with us."
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you, Heather.
That's wonderful.
It's nice to be at home, to do this at home. There's something really, really lovely about it, because I've been at the American Library in Paris twice, often talking about my home, and now I'm doing it here.
All of a sudden, we get invited right in with you.
Exactly.
And
now
your home,
thank you very much. Here it is.
And your home has been featured in some magazines, isn't that right? Some design magazines you've had articles written about. So can I just ask you to remind our viewers of those?
So when I moved in 7 years ago, Apartment Therapy did a house tour of it. And so I don't know if any of you read Apartment Therapy, but it's a kind of series of questions and photographs, and people talk about their homes and what's important to them about their homes. And so that actually became the basis of my humor book that I wrote, that's called Decorating a Room of One's Own. That's literary characters showing you around their home. So it's like Elizabeth Bennet showing you around Pemberley, and Miss Havisham showing you around her house. And it's parody and just kind of joking about home decor culture, like really warmly, affectionately making fun of it, because I love it. So it's very like warm satire. But that house tour was really the kind of one of the big reasons that I ended up writing that book. And then HGTV last fall did 2 really nice features about my bookshelves. And so my friend Sarah, who's on here today, took some really beautiful pictures, and those are on the feature as well. And it was just really fun to talk about arranging books. And I like to keep books in stacks. And so you can probably see like some of my stacks. There aren't really any chairs to sit on in my house. They're all stacks of books on them.
More bookshelves.
I even put together a stack of the object lessons books.
Oh my gosh.
All together, but also my stacks get a little out of control. And so I have to shelve things, and it's fun to arrange things on shelves and figure out how you're going to organize your bookshelves. So that's what the HGTV pieces were about.
Oh, that's lovely. And I saw an audience member in my book group, Ida, get very excited about decorating a room of one's own.
Yes, I saw that.
Yes, so I highly recommend that book too. And
thanks. It was a lot of fun to write, and I got to buy a lot of new books.
And it's so beautifully illustrated as well. I mean, it's just such a compelling object in and of itself, I think, too. Yeah.
It is a pretty object. And that is all Becca Statlatter, who is the illustrator. She did such an amazing job. I think there's like 25 or 30 of her beautiful illustrations. And she did the cover, which is a woman sitting in a chair, you know, in her domestic space reading, which is just a really beautiful illustration. She's an amazing illustrator.
Okay, now we have time for these two last questions / comments that I see, so I'll go ahead and read them out. One is from Kieren, and she just writes, whenever I see snow globes, I think of you and really how unique they are. Thank you for sharing.
That's lovely. They are magical.
Absolutely. And then Saya writes, thank you for the lovely reading. Quick question, where would you consider your home away from home?
Oh, well, definitely Paris is a home away from home. I am always happy to go, and I've just sort of decided a couple of years ago that I want to spend more time there, and I have been doing that for a couple of years. So I plan to keep doing that in the future when we can all travel again. It's a place that I spent time when I was younger, and I just love it. Here, my home away from home is definitely the Smoky Mountains of Eastern Tennessee, which I love. And there's a little town called Townsend that is right on one of the borders to the national park. And it's a bunch of kind of cute independent motels and like barbecue joints sort of all along this one street. And it's really small, and there's a beautiful river that runs through the town called the Tennessee Little River. And I rent a cabin there from a really nice couple, and I just sit out on the deck of that cabin over the river with Millie and read and write and relax. And if I ever had any money to do it, I would love to buy a kind of Dolly Parton style Tennessee mountain home. That would make me very, very happy. It's about 5 hours from here. So it's like it's a good trip, but it's a beautiful drive because you drive through the park, up to the North Carolina, like Tennessee border, and then back down again through the park. And the Smoky Mountains are just the most beautiful things ever. I mean, they're just out of control beautiful.
Great. Well, thank you. And before we all sign off here, just thank you so much again, Susan, for chatting with us, for answering our questions, and for your wonderful essay as well. It gave us such a nice view into your extraordinary life, we can put it that way. And I also wanted to remind everybody who's tuning in that the American Library in Paris is accepting donations still online. So traditionally at these events, our evenings with an author, they're free and open to the public, but we do welcome €10 donations. So if you enjoyed the event, or if at any point you'd like to make a donation to the library, please just use the link that I sent out in the email with the Zoom details, and we'd very much appreciate your support. We're a nonprofit as well as an independent institution, meaning we don't receive support from the US or France, no governmental support that is, and we rely heavily on donors. So just to reiterate that message, and again, thank you, Susan. This has been really fun. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight, and we'll have more events like these, so just stay tuned.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine and Audrey, for inviting me. It's such a total pleasure. And thank you all for listening and coming, and for your wonderful, thoughtful questions. And I really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day or night.
Awesome. And we really look forward to seeing you in Paris, Susan.
I look forward to it also.
When you can travel, we'll have something in person, and we'll get you your tote bag.
As soon as I can. I want my tote bag.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you,
everybody. Bye.
Bye.